My name is Margaret Elena Whitmore, and I'm 32 years old. I thought I knew my family until the day my father's will was read. That's when I discovered the most devastating betrayal of my life, and the most shocking twist that would change everything forever. The mahogany conference room at Henderson and Associates felt suffocating that gray October morning. Rain streaked the tall windows as we gathered around the polished table, my stepmother Linda, my half-brother Derek, and me. The air was thick with tension and the lingering scent of my father's cologne that seemed to cling to his leather briefcase, now sitting closed beside the lawyer. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light. Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here to discuss the last will and testament of Robert James Whitmore. I twisted my wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd developed since Dad's sudden heart attack 3 weeks ago. At 58, he'd seemed invincible, still running Whitmore Construction like the empire he'd built from nothing. Now he was gone, and the family dynamics I'd tried so hard to navigate were about to explode. Derek leaned back in his chair with that smug expression I'd grown to hate over the years. At 27, my half-brother had inherited Dad's dark hair and strong jawline, but none of his work ethic or integrity. He drummed his manicured fingers on the table, fingers that had never known real labor, unlike mine, which still bore calluses from summers spent working construction sites alongside Dad. Let's just get this over with, Derek said, checking his Rolex. I've got a meeting at the country club in an hour. Linda shot him a warning look, but I could see the barely contained excitement in her eyes. She'd been waiting for this moment for 15 years, ever since she'd married my father when I was 17. The gold-digging secretary who'd convinced my grieving father that marrying her would give me a mother figure after my real mom died of cancer. What a joke that turned out to be. Mr. Henderson began reading the formal language, but I barely heard the legal jargon. My mind kept drifting to the last conversation I'd had with Dad, just 2 days before his heart attack. We'd been in his study, surrounded by the antique doll collection that had been my grandmother's pride and joy. Maggie, he'd said, using the nickname only he was allowed to use, I want you to know that everything I've done has been to protect what matters most. I thought he was talking about the family business, about securing Derek's future. How wrong I was. The lawyer's voice cut through my memories. To my beloved son Derek, I leave my personal vehicles and the sum of $50,000. Derek's face fell slightly, but he maintained his composure. To my dear wife Linda, I leave the family home and the sum of $100,000, with the understanding that she'll ensure Margaret always has a place to stay if needed. I saw Linda's jaw tighten. She'd expected more, much more. Then came the moment that changed everything. The remainder of my assets, including the antique doll collection that belonged to my mother, I leave to my daughter Margaret Elena Whitmore. Derek's chair scraped against the floor as he stood up, his face flushed with anger. That's it? 50 grand and she gets dolls? He laughed bitterly, and Linda actually snickered behind her hand. I mean, come on. I'm getting the house and the business, right? The will just hasn't gotten to that part yet. The room fell silent except for the rain pattering against the windows. Mr. Henderson looked up from the papers, his expression grave. Actually, Derek, that's all there is regarding the estate assets. What do you mean? Derek's voice cracked. Your father's business, Whitmore Construction, was never actually in his name. The company has been registered under. Under whose name? Linda demanded, her composure finally cracking. I felt my heart stop as Mr. Henderson's eyes met mine across the table. Have you ever experienced a moment when your entire world shifted in an instant? When everything you thought you knew turned out to be a lie? Stay with me, because what happened next in that conference room changed my life forever. But first, let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding my family's twisted dynamics is the only way you'll truly grasp just how deep this betrayal ran, and how sweet the revenge would taste. Let me take you back 15 years, to when I was 17 and my world first started crumbling. That's when Linda Martinez walked into our lives, all glossy red lipstick and calculated sympathy, clutching a casserole dish like it was her ticket to a better life. My mother had been gone for 6 months when Linda started showing up at our house. First, it was just dropping off meals for poor Robert and his grieving daughter. Then it was staying to help with laundry. Before I knew it, she'd moved her entire life into our home, redecorating my mother's spaces and treating me like an unwelcome guest. Dad was a mess after Mom died. Robert Whitmore, the man who could negotiate million-dollar construction contracts without breaking a sweat, couldn't figure out how to work the washing machine or cook anything more complicated than toast. Linda swooped in like a vulture, feeding on his vulnerability. "She's just trying to help us, Maggie," Dad would say whenever I complained about Linda rearranging Mom's kitchen or throwing away her books. "You need a woman's influence in your life." What I needed was time to grieve, but Linda had other plans. The wedding was small, out of respect for your mother's memory, Dad claimed, though I suspected it was really because Linda didn't want to wait long enough to plan something elaborate. I wore a dress I hated and smiled for photos while dying inside. Derek came along 2 years later, and suddenly I wasn't just competing with Linda for Dad's attention, I was competing with the son he'd always wanted. The golden boy who could do no wrong, even when he was failing in school and getting arrested for underage drinking. Boys will be boys, Linda would laugh whenever Derek got into trouble, while I was grounded for a week if I came home 5 minutes past curfew. But here's what Linda and Derek never understood about my relationship with Dad: we had something they could never touch. Every summer from age 13 until I graduated college, I worked construction alongside him. While Derek was at summer camp or sleeping until noon, I was learning to read blueprints, operate machinery, and understand every aspect of the business. Dad taught me that construction wasn't just about building structures, it was about creating legacies. "Someday, Maggie, all of this will matter more than you know," he'd tell me as we stood on job sites, watching buildings rise from empty lots. I thought he was just being sentimental. I had no idea he was preparing me for war. The real tension began when I graduated from business school and wanted to work at Whitmore Construction full-time. Derek had dropped out of college twice and was finding himself in Europe on Dad's dime, but Linda was adamant that the family business was his birthright. "Margaret has her own life to build," Linda would say during our increasingly hostile family dinners. "Derek needs to learn responsibility." But Derek didn't want responsibility, he wanted the rewards without the work. He'd show up to the office hungover, hit on female employees, and treat the construction crews like they were beneath him. Dad would get reports of Derek's behavior, but Linda always had excuses ready. "He's still young, Robert. He's learning." Meanwhile, I was putting in 60-hour weeks, managing client relationships, and actually contributing to the company's growth. But every family gathering became a battlefield where Linda and Derek would tag team to diminish my contributions while inflating his importance. The breaking point came 3 years ago at Derek's 24th birthday party. Linda had invited the entire extended family to the country club, making sure everyone knew that Derek was being groomed to take over the family empire. I'd had enough wine to finally speak my mind. "What empire?" I asked during the toast. "Derek hasn't worked a single full week at the company in 2 years." The table went silent. Linda's face turned the color of her lipstick. "At least I don't have to prove my worth by getting my hands dirty like some common laborer," Derek shot back. "Those common laborers are the reason you can afford your BMW and your downtown apartment," I snapped. Dad had intervened before things got uglier, but the damage was done. From that night forward, Linda and Derek made it clear I was the outsider, and they were just waiting for Dad to die so they could push me out entirely. What they didn't know was that Dad had been watching everything, every slight, every attempt to undermine me, every sign that they cared more about his money than his legacy. And 3 years ago, right after Derek's birthday disaster, Dad had made a decision that would change everything. He'd started making changes to more than just his will. He'd been planning something bigger, something that would protect not just his assets, but his life's work. I found all of this out much later, of course. At the time, I just thought I was fighting a losing battle against two people who seemed to have Dad wrapped around their fingers. But here's what I never suspected. While Linda and Derek were plotting to squeeze me out of the family business, Dad was quietly making sure that could never happen. The question was, when Derek claimed he was inheriting the business that day in the lawyer's office, why was he so confident? What had Linda and Derek been planning that made them so sure they'd won? The answer would come out in the most devastating way possible, and it would make their shock at the will reading seem like nothing compared to what was coming next. Under whose name? Linda's voice was sharp with desperation as Mr. Henderson hesitated. The company has been registered under Margaret Elena Whitmore's name for the past 3 years, he said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's face went from confident smugness to pale shock in seconds. Linda looked like she'd been slapped. That's impossible, Derek stammered. Dad always said. Your father said many things, Mr. Henderson interrupted gently. But the legal documents don't lie. Margaret has been the sole owner of Whitmore Construction since her 29th birthday. I felt like I was floating outside my own body. 3 years ago. Right after Derek's birthday party when everything had exploded. Dad hadn't just been upset about the family tension, he'd been taking action. There must be some mistake, Linda said, her voice rising. Robert would never. There's no mistake, Mrs. Whitmore. I have all the transfer documents here, signed and notarized. Mr. Henderson pulled out a thick folder. Robert came to me shortly after an incident at a family gathering. He said he needed to protect his life's work from people who didn't understand its value. Derek shot up from his chair, his face now bright red. This is bullshit. He promised me that business. We talked about it just last month. When? I found my voice finally. When did he promise you anything? Derek's eyes darted to Linda, and I caught something, a look that made my stomach clench. Derek, Linda warned, but it was too late. The night before he died, Derek blurted out. We had dinner, and he said he was ready to make me partner. He was going to change everything. My blood went cold. The night before he died? Dad was at home with chest pains. He canceled dinner with me because he wasn't feeling well. Another look passed between Linda and Derek, and suddenly pieces started clicking into place. The hushed phone calls I'd overheard. Linda's sudden interest in Dad's medications. Derek's frequent visits to the house when I wasn't there. Where exactly did you have this dinner? I pressed. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Linda jumped in quickly. He's upset, Margaret. He doesn't remember clearly. No, I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I want to know where they had dinner, because Dad's calendar was empty that night. I checked it when I was arranging his affairs. Mr. Henderson was watching this exchange with growing concern. Perhaps we should focus on the legal matters at hand. Wait, I held up my hand, my mind racing. Derek, you said Dad promised to make you partner. But according to these documents, he'd already transferred ownership to me 3 years ago. Why would he need to make you partner in a company you thought he still owned? The trap I hadn't even known I was setting snapped shut. Derek's face went white. Unless, I continued, my voice getting stronger, you knew he didn't own it anymore. Unless you both knew exactly who owned Whitmore Construction. Linda stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're grieving, and you're playing detective. Sit down, Linda. The authority in my voice surprised even me. Both of you, sit down and tell me what really happened the night my father died. Margaret, Mr. Henderson interjected, perhaps this conversation should happen privately. No. I turned to him. You said Dad came to you after a family incident 3 years ago. What exactly did he say? Mr. Henderson looked uncomfortable but opened his notes. Your father was concerned about attempts to manipulate him into changing his will. He mentioned pressure from family members who were unaware of the business ownership transfer. Unaware? I laughed bitterly. Or pretending to be unaware. Derek finally cracked. Look, we figured it out, okay? Linda found the documents in his safe about 6 months ago. Derek! Linda hissed. But he was spiraling now, the golden boy facade crumbling. We knew you owned the company, but we also knew Dad was getting sicker. His heart problems were getting worse, and we thought. You thought what? I demanded. We thought if something happened to him, we could contest everything. Say he wasn't in his right mind when he transferred the business. That you'd manipulated him. The room spun around me. You were planning to contest Dad's competency? Linda's silence was answer enough. That's why you were so interested in his medications lately, I whispered. That's why Derek was suddenly visiting so much. You were building a case that he was mentally unfit. Margaret, Linda finally spoke, her voice cold and calculating in a way I'd never heard before. You have to understand, Derek is his son. The business should go to him. It's the natural order. Natural order? I exploded. I've worked in that company for 8 years. I've bled for it, learned every aspect of it, built relationships with clients and crews that Derek couldn't care less about. But you're not his real child, Linda said quietly. The words hit me like a physical blow. Even Derek looked shocked by his mother's cruelty. Not his real child? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. You know what I mean. Derek is his son, his legacy. You're just the daughter from his first marriage. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat loudly. Mrs. Whitmore, I think you should be very careful about what you say next. These statements could be considered relevant if any legal challenges arise. But I wasn't thinking about legal challenges anymore. I was thinking about all the nights Dad had stayed up late, teaching me about business. All the times he told me I was his pride and joy. All the moments when I'd felt like maybe, just maybe, I was enough. Get out, I said quietly. Margaret, Derek started. Get out! I screamed, and both of them jumped. Get out of this office. Get out of my sight. And get out of my company. Linda's mask finally dropped completely. Your company? You think owning some papers makes you capable of running Whitmore Construction? You're nothing without your father's name, and when we're done with you. When you're done with me, what? I stood up, and for the first time in my life, I felt the full weight of my father's legacy behind me. You'll what? Linda? Contest the will of a man who was competent enough to run a multi-million-dollar business until the day he died? Challenge the business ownership that's been legally mine for 3 years? I turned to Mr. Henderson. Do I need them here for anything else? No, Ms. Whitmore. The will reading is complete. Then they can leave. We have a company to discuss. As Linda and Derek gathered their things, Derek turned back one more time. This isn't over, Margaret. I smiled at him, really smiled, for the first time in years. You're absolutely right, Derek. It's not over. It's just beginning. But as they stormed out of the conference room, I realized I had no idea just how deep their betrayal went, or how far they'd already gone to destroy everything Dad had built. The real shock was still coming. The silence in the conference room after Linda and Derek left was thick with tension and possibility. Mr. Henderson shuffled through his papers, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama he'd just witnessed. Ms. Whitmore, he said gently, there are a few more things your father wanted me to share with you privately. I sank back into my chair, emotionally drained but strangely energized. More surprises? Your father anticipated that the will reading might not go smoothly. He left sealed instructions to be opened only if there were complications. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Dad's familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then the will reading has probably been as messy as I expected. By now you know that Whitmore Construction has been yours for 3 years, but there's so much more you need to understand. I discovered Linda and Derek's plan to contest my competency 18 months ago. Derek got drunk at the country club and bragged to his friends about inheriting the old man's empire once they proved I was losing my marbles. One of my golf partners overheard and told me. My hands shook as I continued reading. I've been documenting everything since then, Maggie. Every attempt to access my medical records, every conversation where they discussed my declining mental state, every meeting with lawyers they thought I didn't know about. It's all in the safety deposit box at First National, box 247. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my desk in the study. But here's what they never figured out. I wasn't just protecting the business from them. I was protecting you. The letter went on to detail a web of deception that made my stomach turn. Linda had been gradually increasing Dad's blood pressure medication, hoping to make his heart condition worse. Derek had been stealing from the company for months, small amounts that wouldn't be noticed immediately but would add up to serious embezzlement charges. Most importantly, Maggie, the doll collection isn't just antiques. Each doll contains something precious, sometimes jewelry, sometimes stock certificates, sometimes cash. Your grandmother started this during the Great Depression as a way to hide assets. The total value of what's hidden in those dolls is approximately $2.3 million. I gasped out loud. Mr. Henderson looked up with concern. Everything all right? The dolls, I whispered. They snickered about the dolls. Linda and Derek have no idea what those dolls actually contain. They probably threw them away already, thinking they were worthless. But I moved the entire collection to the safety deposit box last month. They're waiting for you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you all of this while I was alive. I needed to be sure about their intentions, and I needed to protect you from the burden of knowing how deep their betrayal went. But I also needed you to be strong enough to handle the truth. You are not just my daughter, Maggie. You are my legacy, my pride, and the only person I trust to carry on what we built together. Whitmore Construction isn't just a business, it's proof that hard work and integrity matter. Don't let them destroy that. The combination to the safe at home is your mother's birthday. Inside you'll find evidence of everything, including recordings I made of their conversations about contesting the will. I love you more than you'll ever know. Make me proud. Dad. P.S. Fire Derek immediately. The embezzlement evidence is in folder marked personnel issues in the safe. I looked up at Mr. Henderson, tears streaming down my face. He knew. He knew everything. Your father was a very thorough man, Mr. Henderson said kindly. He came to see me every few months to update his plans. He wanted to make sure you were protected no matter what happened. That afternoon, I drove straight to the bank. The safety deposit box was exactly as Dad had described, filled with the antique doll collection that everyone had dismissed as worthless junk, plus manila folders stuffed with documentation of Linda and Derek's schemes. The recordings were the worst part. Hours of conversations between Linda and Derek, planning how they'd challenge Dad's mental competency, discussing which doctors they could bribe to support their case, even debating whether they should have him committed to a nursing home. In one particularly chilling conversation from just 2 weeks before Dad died, Linda talked about speeding things along with his medication. I called the police that evening. The next month was a whirlwind of criminal investigations, asset recovery, and putting Whitmore Construction back on solid ground. Derek was arrested for embezzlement. Turns out he'd stolen over $200,000 over 2 years. Linda was charged with elder abuse and attempted murder for tampering with Dad's medication. But the most satisfying moment came when I had to evict them from the family home. "You can't do this!" Linda screamed as the movers loaded her belongings into a truck. "Robert left me this house." "Actually," I said, consulting the legal papers, "Dad left you the house with the condition that I always have a place to stay if needed. Since you tried to have him declared incompetent and possibly murdered him, I'd say that violates the spirit of his wishes. My lawyers disagree with your right to the house." Derek, out on bail and facing serious jail time, looked nothing like the cocky golden boy who'd strutted into that conference room. "Margaret, please. We can work something out. Family should stick together." I thought about all the years of being dismissed, overlooked, and treated like an outsider in my own family. "You're right, Derek. Family should stick together. That's why Dad made sure I'd be taken care of, and why he documented every single thing you both did to betray that family." As their moving truck pulled away, I stood in the doorway of my childhood home, now legally mine, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. 6 months later, Whitmore Construction had its most profitable quarter in 5 years. I'd promoted several longtime employees, hired new project managers, and implemented profit-sharing programs that Dad had always wanted but Linda had convinced him were too generous. The antique dolls were appraised and sold to collectors, except for one, my great-grandmother's favorite, which now sits on my desk as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things come in unexpected packages. Linda was sentenced to 8 years for elder abuse and attempted murder. Derek got 4 years for embezzlement. I never visited either of them in prison. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about what happened to them, if I regret how everything turned out. The answer is simple: I don't regret protecting my father's legacy and the truth. Dad taught me that construction isn't just about building structures, it's about creating something that lasts, something that can weather any storm. He spent his final years constructing the most important thing of all, a foundation strong enough to support the truth, no matter how ugly it got. Standing in my office now, looking out at the construction sites that bear the Whitmore name, I understand what he meant when he said everything would matter more than I knew. He wasn't just talking about the business or the money. He was talking about justice. About the knowledge that good people can win, even when the odds seem impossible. About the satisfaction of seeing manipulators and abusers finally face consequences for their actions. The dolls that everyone snickered about didn't just contain hidden treasures, they contained the key to everything. And the grin I couldn't stop in that conference room? It was just the beginning. Have you ever experienced betrayal like this from people you trusted? Have you ever discovered that family members were plotting behind your back, or found strength you didn't know you had when everything seemed lost? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that justice and truth really can prevail, even in the darkest moments. 2 years had passed since the will reading that changed my life, and I thought I'd uncovered all of Linda and Derek's secrets. Whitmore Construction was thriving, Linda was serving her prison sentence, and Derek had been released after 18 months with strict probation terms. I'd finally found peace. Or so I thought. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing blueprints for our biggest project yet, a luxury hotel downtown, when my assistant buzzed in. "Ms. Whitmore? There's a woman here to see you. She says it's about your father and it's urgent." I looked up from the plans, puzzled. Did she give a name? Carmen Rodriguez. She says she worked with your father years ago. The name wasn't familiar, but something in my assistant's tone made me curious. Send her in. The woman who entered my office was probably in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind brown eyes that seemed to carry years of worry. She clutched a manila envelope against her chest like it contained something precious. "Ms. Whitmore, thank you for seeing me. I know this is unexpected." Her voice carried a slight accent, and her hands trembled slightly as she sat down. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Rodriguez?" "It's about your father, and about something I should have told you years ago." She set the envelope on my desk. "I was Robert's housekeeper for 12 years, from when you were in high school until about 6 months before he died." I frowned. "I don't remember Dad having a housekeeper named Carmen." "That's because your stepmother fired me and told your father I'd quit. She said I was stealing from the house." Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "I never stole anything, Ms. Whitmore. But I did something worse, I kept quiet about things I should have reported." My stomach began to knot. "What kind of things?" Carmen opened the envelope and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Your father gave me this about a year before your stepmother fired me. He was getting suspicious about some things happening in the house, and he asked me to keep track of anything unusual." She placed the recorder on my desk. "There are conversations on here that you need to hear. But first, I need to tell you something else, something that might be hard to accept." "What is it?" Carmen took a deep breath. "Your father didn't die of natural causes, Ms. Whitmore. I know the investigation concluded that Linda was tampering with his medication, but there's more to it than that." The room seemed to tilt. "What do you mean?" "Linda wasn't just increasing his blood pressure medication randomly. She was following a very specific plan, designed to make his death look like a natural progression of his heart disease." Carmen's voice dropped to a whisper. "And she wasn't working alone. Derek was helping her, we know that already." "Not Derek." Carmen shook her head. "Someone else. Someone who knew exactly how to manipulate his medications to cause maximum damage while staying under the radar." I felt cold suddenly. "Who?" "Dr. Patricia Henley. Your father's cardiologist." The name hit me like a physical blow. Dr. Henley had been treating Dad for 3 years. She was the one who'd adjusted his medications multiple times in the months before his death. She was the one who'd assured our family that his condition was manageable with proper care. That's impossible, I said weakly. Dr. Henley was trying to help him. Carmen picked up the recorder. Listen to this conversation from 10 months before your father died. Linda didn't know I was cleaning the upstairs hallway. She pressed play, and Linda's voice filled my office, clear and calculating. Patricia, we've discussed this. The timeline needs to be natural. No one can suspect anything. A woman's voice I recognized as Dr. Henley responded, I understand, but Robert is stronger than we anticipated. Even with the increased dosages, his body is adapting. Then we need to try something else. What about the new medication you mentioned? The ACE inhibitor interaction? Linda, that's extremely dangerous. If someone figures out the combination, no one will figure it out if you do your job properly. You're the doctor. You control his medical records. My hands were shaking as I reached for the recorder. There's more? Hours of it, Carmen said sadly. Your stepmother was paying Dr. Henley $200,000 to slowly kill your father while making it look like his heart disease was progressing naturally. I felt sick. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Carmen's eyes filled with tears. Because I was terrified. Linda threatened my family, Ms. Whitmore. She knew I was undocumented at the time, and she said if I ever said anything about what I'd heard, she'd have me deported and make sure my children were taken away. But why now? Why are you telling me this? Because Dr. Henley is still practicing. She's still out there, and last week I saw her name in the newspaper. She's been nominated for some prestigious medical award for her work with heart patients. Carmen's voice turned angry. She killed your father for money, and now she's being celebrated as a hero. I stared at the recorder, my mind racing. Linda and Derek were already in prison, but they'd been the puppets, not the mastermind. Dr. Henley was the one with the medical knowledge to pull off a perfect murder, and she was still free. Carmen, this evidence, can we prove it's authentic? Your father was very careful. He had me hide copies of everything in a place Linda would never think to look. She reached into her purse and pulled out a key. Your father's storage unit downtown. Unit 847. He rented it under my name but put you as the emergency contact. That afternoon, Carmen and I drove to the storage facility. Unit 847 was small but packed with boxes of documents, more recordings, and even photographs of Linda meeting secretly with Dr. Henley at various restaurants around the city. But the most damning evidence was in a folder labeled Medical Conspiracy. Dad had somehow obtained copies of bank records showing payments from an offshore account Linda had hidden to Dr. Henley's personal account. The payments corresponded exactly with each change in Dad's medication regimen. There were also copies of Dad's real medical tests, tests that Dr. Henley had apparently altered in his official records to make his condition appear worse than it actually was. My God, I whispered, reading through the documents. She was systematically poisoning him while telling everyone, including him, that he was getting the best possible care. The most heartbreaking discovery was a letter Dad had written but never sent, addressed to the state medical board. In it, he detailed his suspicions about Dr. Henley and Linda's relationship, but noted that he couldn't prove anything yet. I know something is wrong with my treatment, he'd written. My symptoms don't match what Patricia is telling me about my condition. But she's been my doctor for years, and Linda trusts her completely. I need more evidence before I can accuse a respected physician of attempted murder. He'd been gathering that evidence when his heart finally gave out, not from natural progression of his disease, but from the careful manipulation of medications designed to kill him slowly. That evening, I called the FBI. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. With Carmen's recordings and Dad's hidden evidence, they were able to trace the money trail and uncover a wider conspiracy. Dr. Henley hadn't just targeted my father, she'd been involved in the suspicious deaths of at least 4 other wealthy patients over the past decade, always in partnership with greedy family members willing to pay for her services. Linda, already serving time for elder abuse, was hit with additional charges of conspiracy to commit murder and running a criminal enterprise. Her sentence was extended to life without parole. Derek, who had genuinely been unaware of the murder plot, was released early from prison in exchange for his testimony against both Linda and Dr. Henley. He left town immediately after the trial, and I never saw him again. Dr. Henley was sentenced to death. But the revelation that shook me most came during the trial, when it was revealed that Linda had approached Dr. Henley just 3 months after marrying my father. She'd been planning his murder for over 14 years, waiting patiently for the right moment when his natural heart problems would provide the perfect cover. Standing outside the courthouse after Dr. Henley's sentencing, Carmen took my hand. "Your father would be proud," she said. "He never stopped fighting for the truth, even when he knew they were trying to kill him." "Why didn't he just leave her?" I asked. "If he suspected what was happening, why didn't he divorce Linda and expose everything sooner?" Carmen smiled sadly. "Because he was protecting you, Mija. He knew that if he moved too quickly, Linda might panic and do something to hurt you too. Everything he did, the secret recordings, the hidden evidence, transferring the business to you, it was all to make sure you'd be safe and have the tools to get justice after he was gone." 6 months later, I established the Robert Whitmore Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention, funded by the $2.3 million from the antique dolls and the life insurance payout that Linda had expected to inherit. The foundation provides legal support for families dealing with financial elder abuse and funds research into detecting medication tampering in elderly patients. Carmen became the foundation's first full-time investigator. Her immigration status was resolved quickly once the FBI needed her testimony, and she's now a U.S. citizen with her entire family safely living here. As I write this, 5 years have passed since that terrible reading. Whitmore Construction has grown into one of the largest firms in the state, but more importantly, the Robert Whitmore Foundation has helped expose 12 cases of elder abuse and prevented countless others. The antique doll that sits on my desk isn't just a reminder of hidden treasures anymore, it's a symbol of the patience and planning required to protect the people we love. Dad spent years carefully documenting Linda's betrayal, knowing he might not live to see justice served, but trusting that the truth would eventually come to light. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it requires the courage of people like Carmen, who risk everything to speak up for those who can no longer speak for themselves. And sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places, like a collection of dolls that everyone thought was worthless junk. But it always comes, if we're patient enough and brave enough to keep fighting for it. Dad was right about one thing, everything he did mattered more than I knew. But I think he'd be proudest of what happened after he was gone, when the foundation he unknowingly provided for became a way to protect other families from the kind of betrayal we endured. The truth didn't just set me free, it became a beacon for others lost in their own darkness, showing them that even the most carefully planned deceptions can be exposed, and even the most powerful conspirators can be brought to justice. Have you ever experienced betrayal like this from people you trusted? Have you ever discovered that family members were plotting behind your back, or found strength you didn't know you had when everything seemed lost? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that justice and truth really can prevail, even in the darkest moments.